Verse of the day, Friday, January 9th, 2026. Matthew 6 verses 19 to 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Treasures in heaven, a narrative on enduring value. The passage from Matthew 6 verses 19 to 21, which urges believers not to hoard earthly treasures, but instead to invest in those of heaven, presents one of the most profound ethical and philosophical challenges in Christian teaching. This directive moves beyond mere financial advice. It functions as a central tenet defining one's ultimate priorities and the allocation of life's most precious resources: time, energy, and devotion. The core message hinges on the contrast between the ephemeral nature of earthly accumulation and the permanence of heavenly rewards, concluding with the inescapable link between where one's treasure lies and the ultimate location of one's heart. Understanding this verse requires a narrative exploration of value, decay, and eternal consequence. The ephemeral nature of earthly accumulation. Jesus grounds his teaching in observable reality. Earthly possessions are subject to inevitable destruction. Moths and vermin serve as vivid metaphors for slow, creeping decay, while thieves represent sudden, catastrophic loss. This is not simply an abstract warning against materialism. It reflects an understanding of economic and physical laws applicable across all eras. Consider, for instance, the collapse of empires whose treasuries, once filled with gold and precious artifacts, are now buried or scattered, their original significance long since vanished. In the modern context, even seemingly secure assets face obsolescence. Highly valued technology today may be worthless scrap in a decade. Fortunes built on unstable markets can vanish overnight, as illustrated by the spectacular failures of companies or personal investments during economic downturns. The narrative here is one of inherent fragility. Any storehouse built on earth is fundamentally insecure because the world system itself is temporary. To anchor one's ultimate identity and security in such a foundation is to build a life upon sand, vulnerable to the first significant storm. Storing treasures where value endures. The counterpoint offered is the concept of storing treasures in heaven. This is not about burying physical assets in some celestial location, but rather about investing in activities, relationships, and character traits that possess eternal significance. This investment paradigm involves acts of selfless service, cultivating virtues like compassion and integrity, spreading spiritual truth, and dedicating oneself to purposes that transcend mortal existence. For example, a life dedicated to educating the marginalized or advocating for justice creates a legacy that outlives the benefactor, echoing into future generations and, theologically, having an eternal resonance. Such actions are immune to inflation, theft, or environmental damage. The value derived from faithfulness, love, and obedience is incorruptible. This spiritual investment yields returns measured not in currency, but in spiritual maturity and eternal relationship with the divine. The heart follows the treasure. The final statement, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also," provides the crucial diagnostic tool. This is a statement of undeniable causality. The location of one's treasure dictates the orientation of one's affections, attention, and motivation. A person who spends a majority of their waking hours pursuing career advancement, luxury goods, or social status, regardless of their stated spiritual beliefs, reveals that their heart resides in the earthly realm. Their decisions, their anxieties, and their joys are tied directly to the fate of those perishable items. Conversely, an individual whose primary focus involves prayer, ministry, ethical living, and acts of charity demonstrates, through the narrative of their daily choices, that their ultimate hope and security are fixed on the eternal. The heart does not follow an abstract ideal. It follows demonstrated investment. This serves as a powerful narrative test of authenticity. We do not simply decide where our hearts will be. Our spending and striving habits determine that location for us. Conclusion. Matthew 6 verses 19 to 21 offers a timeless narrative framework for evaluating a meaningful existence. It compels a shift from a short-term ledger of material gain to a long-term accounting of eternal significance. By recognizing the inherent vulnerability of earthly wealth and choosing instead to invest in the enduring qualities of faith and selfless action, one effectively redirects the trajectory of one's life. The true security and ultimate joy are found not in what can be held and guarded on earth, but in what has been permanently secured through eternal commitment, ensuring that the heart is irrevocably placed where true, indestructible value resides. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount contrasts earthly treasures, which are temporary and vulnerable, with heavenly treasures, which are eternal and secure, and reveals that one's heart follows their treasure, urging believers to focus on eternal values over material wealth. It teaches that storing treasures in heaven involves living for God's kingdom and righteousness, not just tithing, but all acts that align with God's eternal purpose, making spiritual investments that last forever. Key meanings and interpretations: earthly versus heavenly treasures. Earthly treasures, money, possessions, status, are fleeting and subject to decay, theft, and loss, while heavenly treasures are permanent and secure. The heart follows the treasure. The central principle is that what you value most, your treasure, dictates where your deepest affections and focus lie, your heart. How to store treasures in heaven. This involves shifting focus from temporary earthly gains to eternal, spiritual values, such as seeking God's kingdom and righteousness first, Matthew 6 verse 33. Investing resources in God's purposes, even through generous giving and acts of obedience. Living with an eternal perspective, not just for the present moment. A call to stewardship. The passage isn't necessarily against having possessions, but against making them the ultimate priority, urging believers to be faithful stewards of what God has given them for eternal purposes. In essence, Jesus calls people to make choices and investments that align with eternity, ensuring their hearts are set on things that will last forever, rather than on fleeting worldly comforts. Wish you all a very blessed and a joyful Friday. Nazarene